My name's Ryan. And today I'm going to teach you how to be a high bar god. Here we go. Let's just go ahead and get one thing out of the way, shall we? It is 1000% necessary that if you want to be a high bar god, you always squat to depth. No excuses. Now listen, I'm not referring to the powerlifting standards of depth or just the general strength and conditioning standards of depth, where hips being parallel with your knees passes as a satisfactory squat. In the general scheme of things, that's a great squat, good on you. But this is about being a high bar god, not just a run-of-the-mill Neanderthal. So let me show you what I mean by good depth here. Alright, now look, before you condemn, criticize, and castigate me and say, oh, Rydog, my hamstrings, my ankles, my quads, my lower body is just so tight that I can't get into good depth with a barbell on my back. Let's just do a little thought experiment, shall we? No barbell, see if you can squat to depth. Take your butt and try to touch it to your calves. Boom. If you can do that without a barbell, you can do it with a barbell. Adding a barbell is not going to do anything to the capacity for your range of motion. It's not. I'm just going to shoot it to you straight. If you have trouble squatting to depth with additional weight, it is most likely that you are not strong enough to handle the weight that you have on the bar in extreme ranges of motion. It's not a lack of mobility in terms of flexibility. We've already established that you can squat low without a barbell. It is a lack of mobility in the strength component, because mobility is this overarching term that consists of flexibility and strength and agility and so on and so forth. It's your ability to be mobile. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody do a squat just like this and try to justify their lack of depth through tight hamstrings. Again, I'm just going to go out there and say it. You have not spent enough time trying to squat to depth with the same loads that you've been using not squatting to depth. Once you get that heavy barbell on your back and you start squatting, if you were to go any lower than the depth that you're used to, your brain's going to start screaming at you, oh my gosh, I'm not used to this, please stand up, I'm not comfortable here. That's all it is. You're not comfortable in these positions. And so you're registering that as tight hamstrings or whatever, instead of you just not practicing squatting to depth. That's all it is. So let's be on the same page here moving forward. This is probably the most important piece of information in this video. You always squat to depth no matter what. In the long run, if this means taking a couple steps back, taking weight off that you're used to moving so that you can actually squat to depth and build up strength in those extreme ranges of motion, well then that's something that you're going to have to come to grips with. There's no shortcut to it, okay? Same page? Fantastic, let's keep it moving. Alright, from here let's talk about some low-hanging fruit, or things that really don't require any skill for you to accomplish them. You just have to be aware of it and then execute. And generally when I say things like this, I'm referring to starting positions. And there's 4 points of emphasis to make sure that we're starting in a good position and setting ourselves up for the best looking squat down the road. Number 1, the position of the bar. All right, so what obviously constitutes a high bar squat is that the bar is resting higher on your back than it would for other squat positions you may see, such as a hybrid squat or a low bar squat. Now your hands in the high bar squat will play a pivotal role in terms of how much tightness you can generate in your back, and a tighter, more secure grip in back is just going to help facilitate for a stronger high bar squat. My general rule of thumb for this is to get your hands as close to your shoulders as you can without any pain or discomfort. I would also like to point out that I don't feel a lot of the weight in my hands and wrists. I'm doing such a good job of squeezing my upper back before I receive the magnitude of the weight on my upper body that I feel the majority of the weight on my traps and over my center of balance, and I really don't feel all that much in my hands and wrists. I strongly recommend that you point your toes slightly out, somewhere in the neighborhood of what I'm showing you right here. If your toes are pointed straight forward, you will not be able to access that deep range of motion as easily as you could than if your toes were pointed slightly out. By pointing your toes out, and giving yourself a little bit of starting hip external rotation, you're just sort of preemptively clearing the way for your hips and torso to sit straight down, instead of it feeling like you have to go almost around your knees in order to achieve that maximum depth. All right, now that we've gotten all that taken care of, before you go to do your squat, pretty much everything should be stacked on top of each other in terms of the barbell and the joints responsible for actually performing the movement. And you want to feel like that barbell is directly over your center of gravity. This is your balance point. And by starting out in a really good position, you're going to ensure that that barbell is going to remain in a good position throughout the entirety of the movement. And so if you've ever had trouble maintaining balance throughout a high bar squat, just spend some sessions really focusing on exactly where you feel like your balance point is. If you're consciously aware of it and you focus on making your balance point as refined as possible, eventually it will become a subconscious endeavor and you don't even have to think about it when you're doing really heavy squats. And a good target for that, to make it easy while you're squatting, is just to think about putting all of your balance over your shoelace. Again, once you've done that enough, it becomes second nature and you don't even have to think about it anymore. All right, let's keep this train rolling. And the third thing I want to talk about is how to initiate the squat. Get it? 1, 2, 3. Sit down, not back. Now I must remind you here, our intent is to squat the most weight that we can as deeply as possible, not to just squat the most weight possible. If the latter was the case, then we choose a low bar squat, which in some people with longer femurs would generate this hips back looking position. And this is totally fine. If that's how you squat, if that's how you feel strong squatting, especially in the low bar position, then by all means keep doing what you're doing. However, it's probably just going to feel awkward and unsequenced if you shoot your hips back and get into deep hip flexion and then try to get into deep knee flexion instead of just doing it harmoniously. And sometimes the first thing that I'll think about in terms of initiating the squat is actually pushing my knees forward as far as possible, so that way my hips can sit straight down. And through this, I feel like I can really express that sit down cue most efficiently. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is getting out of the hole. Now you may be thinking, Rydog, you kind of jumped the gun here a little bit. This whole thing is about squatting to depth. And shouldn't you address that in the section that you're talking about, initiating the squat, where we're actually going to find the bottom of that depth? Let me break another piece of news to you, okay? You don't need a tactile cue. You don't need bands. You don't need somebody on the side telling you when you've reached depth. You just squat until you feel your hamstrings touch your calves, and then you know it's time to squat back up. If you do that enough times, you will subconsciously register in your brain exactly where that depth is, and it becomes like that balance conversation we were talking about earlier. You don't even have to think about it. Now there's two aspects of getting out of the hole that I want to talk about. The first is the intent behind getting out of the hole, and that is being as aggressive as possible, as soon as possible, in terms of reversing the weight back up once you've hit the bottom of the squat. Physiological reasoning for this is our body's innate ability to store and release elastic energy, otherwise known as the stretch shortening cycle. When your muscles and tendons lengthen during eccentric contractions, they quite literally store elastic energy, thereby making concentric contractions more powerful and more efficient upon release of that energy. So as soon as you hit depth, make it a point to blow each rep up as hard and as fast as possible every single time. Secondarily, when you are coming up out of the hole, the cue that I want you to think about is shoulders back, hips forward. Shoulders back, hips forward. Go ahead and say that 3 times so I know that it's ingrained in your brain. Awesome job. We haven't even discussed anything psychological yet. And the glue that holds all of this stuff together is confidence. Every time you approach the bar, you must display confidence. There can be no room for doubt. I'm so serious about that. If you approach the bar or any squat with any level of doubt, that doubt is going to probably express itself somehow in your squat, whether that's you not reaching depth or just not lifting the weight. The more confident you are, the more your brain is going to allow you to push as hard as possible. The better you get at training, the better you get at understanding your body and what it's capable of, the more you are able to pick specific weights and specific rep ranges that you are more than capable of handling at any given time. So you really never should be handling weights that you're just not ready for. And that's just a really good general way of instilling confidence. You should never really be failing any reps. All right, let's put all of that together and smash a set of 5. Remember, everything that I've talked about, I'm filtering through the perspective of using the high bar squat to squat as deep as possible, as efficiently as possible. This is a specific context, and I'm not saying that you should take every point that I've discussed and apply it to every facet of squatting outside of high bar. But if you want to be a high bar squat god, you got to do these things. Training is fun.